as our oldest living Ploesti vet. Bill? At 95 years old, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Bill, and I'm going to ask Bill to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Bill, will you do the honor? Yes, sir. Will you all rise? We can do it together. Ready? The flag, ladies and gentlemen, is over on our left. I pledge allegiance to the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, sir. That's your honor. Thank you.
This question and answer session is really unscripted. And we encourage anybody that has a question out there to make sure to raise your hand, ask it, because my guess is you probably have the same questions as well. So without further ado, Mark, how are we doing?
We're good.
We're good?
We are very good.
I'm probably going to deviate a little bit by setting this first question up. And I'd like Ernie and Al Romano to both comment on it. When the Chattanooga Choo-Choo was hit, they lost an engine, and literally the right wing was almost plowing a furrow in the ground. They got the plane leveled off, and the pilot yelled out, "We have a bomb in the bomb bay and it's live." We got a live 500-pounder in the bomb bay. Al, where are you? Now you correct me if I'm wrong. What did Al do? He raced back to the bomb bay. There's a live 500-pound bomb in the bomb bay. He's looking at it, pounding on it, trying to get it out. And he notices that the ground is coming up awful fast. And now I was just wondering what your thoughts were as you were watching, trying to get rid of that bomb, and the ground is coming up at you. What was going through your mind?
I was thinking, I wanted to hit a good target with that bomb. I didn't want to waste the bomb. So I said, let me know when we come near a bridge. Mr. Polson was with me, and he was a co-pilot, and somebody said, we're coming close to a bridge, so I released the bomb manually, and then we crashed. Frank Keyes was from Kentucky, Cincinnati area. He got killed. Dick Britt got trapped. How I get out to this day, I don't know. And when I finally did get out, Polson and I took the tail gunner and head for the cornfields. That's where they caught us.
Now I understand when you were in the cornfield hiding, they were starting to shoot pretty darn close above your heads, trying to flush you out. Do you remember what happened?
Oh yeah, we had to carry Madeira South. I was scared. I'll be honest. I was very scared. And the guy had a gun and he was going like this. I thought it was going to go off. They brought us back to the plane, and I never said so many Hail Marys and Our Fathers when I was in a plane, but I wouldn't let them know I was scared.
How about you, Ernie? I noticed,
Mr. Polson and
I'd just like to quote something Ernie wrote, and here's what Ernie wrote about that moment. O'Reilly had skillfully leveled the ship out, but it was just about over. The head lay a rough riverbed. We were going down that awful feeling of, this is it. Crash and that horrible sound of metal scraping, screeching, your head and body being banged and wondering when consciousness would end and almost wishing it would. Do you remember that, Ernie?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was kind of a scary time. You just don't really know what's going to happen next. And one time my daughter asked me, what were you thinking just before you crashed? And I completely came apart. And I still do when I think of it. It's a frustrating feeling.
Now, I believe when you guys finally came to a stop, you were wearing an infantry helmet,
I was.
and you remember somebody beat you out of the hatch and somebody jumped square right on top of your head.
Well, if you've seen the picture of our airplane, which is what in the other room, I guess. Anyway, the crash split the airplane, broke in half, and the cockpit was turned over on the side, and there was an open area up here. So the guys that behind me started coming out, trying to get out of the airplane. And about every time I tried to get my seatbelt unfastened, and my parachute unfastened, somebody stepped in my lap, getting out of this hole at the top. And I guess that maybe it was maybe 45 seconds or so, but it seemed like 20 years. With every time I'd get ready to get up, somebody stepped in my lap. Climbing up, which was the easiest way to get up. And it was a little frustrating, but when you got out, you were kind of glad to be out.
And you know, for the O'Reilly crew, it's been said they came down in the luckiest spot in Romania because they landed on the estate of a Romanian princess. And when they crashed and they hightailed it into the cornfield, they're standing in corn, 6, 7 feet high, and the princess comes beating up the road in about a 35 Chevrolet, and the crew is standing there going, are we in Romania or are we back home? And anyway, their lives and the lives of the Romanian or the tidal wave POWs were, I don't know what the right word is, but Princess Catherine. If you read anything about the POWs, Princess Catherine and how she was involved with the POWs, it's a story in and of itself. So would any of the tidal wave vets that were POWs like to talk about Princess Catherine? Just,
What?
Princess Catherine.
Yeah. Princess Ekatana Karaja was a very wealthy Romanian lady who owned a lot of property. And it was upon her property that we crash landed. And she was helpful to us in prison camp in many ways, such as bringing books, cards, and so forth. Many years later, in the late 50s, I was in Paris. I was living in Paris for 3 years there. That was my assignment. Princess Karaja located me. She looked me up through the War Department, and she had escaped from Romania in the top of a frozen food bread rail car. That's the way she escaped. And her daughter later escaped the same way. She was very helpful to us. And our navigator, Dick Brett, who was in the States at the time, he and I collaborated with Princess Karaja and got her to the States. And the first day she was in the States, she was on Queen for a Day in New York City, the program. And from that point, she traveled the USA extensively, giving speeches, telling us about the danger of the Russians to our way of life. That was her message. It became kind of stale after a while. She stayed in our place, probably in your place, Al. She gave speeches all over the country. But let me tell you one more thing, Al, and I'll turn it over to you. When she was 99 years old, she returned to Romania, and she went back to one of her properties, and finally died at age 101. Her daughter, Tanda, lived with us for a while in Paris, and she married a Frenchman and carried on the Karaja royalty, you might say.
I just want to give you a little background on the princess. When she was small, she was kidnapped and brought to England. She was brought up in England, and naturally she spoke the English language. She didn't come back till she would know who she was until she was 16. Is that right?
That's right.
So she used to bring us National Geographic cards, and she brought us the Reader's Digest, all the old magazines, and that kept us going. And and then she came over to the States, and she used to visit us, and we used to get her talking, talking assignments. She would go around speaking against communism. She went around the country speaking against communism. But I used to dread, I used to have to entertain her for a whole week. She was staying at my house. It got too much for me. And she used to love tripe. She loved tripe. And I'd have to get tripe when she came to the house. Yeah, you want anything else you got to say?
I'd like to get a ground crew perspective if I could. Anthony Sapienza, could we ask you a couple questions? And the ground crew, aside from the fact that they were unheralded, the ground crews in North Africa were absolutely miracle workers. North Africa was a long way from the consolidated factory in San Diego. And the pipeline for parts, I would guess, Anthony, got a little bit thin at times. And you had to resort to some good old Yankee ingenuity. And I just wondered if you care to share a little bit what you guys had to do to keep those airplanes in the air.
Well, I don't know. We just, like you say, we just use Yankee ingenuity. One thing we used to do sometimes is, say an airplane landed and going in another group, it landed at our air base. We used to run out there and steal the toolboxes and all the parts were supposed to be going with that airplane. And so that's Yankee ingenuity.
I'd heard that a big problem on the Pratt & Whitney engines is you get cracks in the manifold and you'd have to take the engine all the way off to weld it. And I think it was a 514th ground crew that discovered a way that they could weld the manifold cracks on the engines, and you'd get them get them back in the air a lot quicker. I don't know if you had any experience with that, but it just is remarkable, given the sand and the dirt and the general misery, how you kept those airplanes in the air.
Well, we just, it's the job security is all it was. Usually in North Africa, the engines would last about 100 hours. Kind of the sand would, kind of clean up the cylinders a little more than you wanted. And then they come out with filters to slow down the deterioration of the engines. But I don't know, they just did it. It's our job.
I do want-
Thank you.
I'm going to give away a little bit of the program tomorrow, but we're going to show a film at the memorial service. And in the memorial service, you're going to see a plane, number 64, 8-ball in the film. And there's a young man removing a canvas engine cover, and that young man is sitting right there. So we're going to see him at the memorial service in the film. So, and I didn't know it. Out of the blue, he called and asked about the reunion. And he said, I was in a scene from some 376 footage. I said, is that you? He said, yeah, that was me. That was just one of the many things that sends chills down your back when I finally got a chance to get to know you. I want to stay with the 376. Can we pass it to John Ramey? John, I just wanted to ask you a question. I'm going to give you the mic. Anybody that reads about the Ploesti mission has read about the Flavel crash, the crash in number 28, went into the Med. John was an eyewitness to that crash. So I'm wondering, John, if you could just relay what you remember when you saw the Flavel ship go down.
Well, we were out close to Corfu, and I was looking up, and the plane was up on my left high, and I saw the left waist window, and then the plane kind of tilted, and it came down, it rolled over, came down, I saw the right waist window, and then it went into the ocean. And when it hit, it just went on under, and then a fireball was formed on the surface.
John? John?
Go ahead.
John, hold the microphone.
How many missions did you finish with, John?
I would do it. They want to get you.
All right. How many missions did you fly after your career in the
I did 82 in all.
82 missions? Well, I'm done.
I did 34 in North Africa, and I did 48 in France.
John,
No, B-26s.
John, I was wondering if you could pass the mic to Mary Jerstad Jacobs, right to your left. Mary, if you could just mention a few of your memories of your brother Jack. We'd all just love to hear what you remember about your brother.
I don't hear very well, and I don't think I...
Just share with us for a few seconds what you remember about your brother Jack.
I'm sorry about that.
Those brothers.
I hear quite well with one ear, but not with both of them. So you just would like to know what I feel about Jack.
Yeah, what do you remember?
Well, he was my big brother. He was 4 years older than I, and he always was better at everything than I was, I think. But I didn't ever feel jealous of him because he wasn't the kind that would let you feel that way. You know, he did what he did, and he did it well. And for example, after he had been killed, or before he was killed, but in the service, every time he got near Racine, which is our hometown, he would stop in to see his high school teachers and everyone that had meant anything to him when he was just a young boy. And so the box of letters we have from Jack also include letters from people like his homeroom teacher and everyone that wanted my folks to know, my mother, to know how much Jack meant to them because of the way he kept in touch with them and cared about them. And so he was that kind of young man. And I know my kids know I have a whole box of his letters because my mother never threw a single letter away. And he wrote letters, 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 letters. including one that was just days before he was killed, to tell my mother, I know you think it was her birthday. I know you think this war is all about me. I want you to know that instead of worrying about me, just be glad I'm able to help with this cause. I am not sitting on the sideline letting someone else do it. And that's what so many of these soldiers say. If I didn't do it, my best friend would maybe have to do it. And so, and he loved flying, so, and he wasn't very big. And everyone wondered why he'd want to fly that big a plane. But he did, and he ended up loving that plane like so many others did, even if it wasn't comfortable, it was cold, it was crowded. They didn't have anything good to say about it, but for some reason they all ended up loving it.
That's great, thanks, Mary. I wonder if we could pass the mic down to Dale Halsey. Can we scoot the mic down to Dale? I want to read a little bit about Dale Halsey. His first mission was Ploesti. I'll read a little bit about that mission. He survived the bombing run and the anti-aircraft fire. He survived a crash landing when a German fighter jumped his plane. Survived a frantic run into the woods to evade the enemy who had seen the bomber go down. Now, they were shot down after they got out of Romania. They were shot down in Bulgaria, right on the border with Yugoslavia. Dale hightailed it into the woods. He survived 319 days on the run by linking up with Marshal Tito's Yugoslav partisans. Survived a brutal winter and survived a daring rescue by secret agents. I might add, when he got back home, nobody could believe his story. They all thought he was killed in action. He met friends on his main street in his home in Texas. They said, what the hell are you doing here? You're dead. So Dale, can you share some of your memories of that mission on August 1st, 1943 for us?
Where do you want me to begin?
Anywhere you'd like.
Well, to start with, I guess I'd start with the crash landing. We slid in a plowed field that had shocked corn stacked up in it, and we ended up with one of those bundles of corn in one of our engines. And our pilot thought some of the natives had done that, getting ready to set the plane on fire. But we got out. I climbed out through the roof of the aircraft, escape hatch there, right next to the turret, and I got up and stood on the top of the plane, and the bombardier handed our wounded engineer up to me, and I lifted him out and dangled him over the side of the plane until the bombardier could get out and get down on the ground to take him away from the airplane. After we sat there for a little while, I saw down the way about a mile a bunch of soldiers climbing into an open truck. And I assumed they were coming to get us from the plane, so I and 3 others took off to the woods to avoid being arrested. The two officers, the co-pilot and the bombardier, went on one side of a ravine, and another gunner and myself went on the other side. And after we kind of got out of sight of the plane, we could tell that the partisans, we didn't know that's who they were at that time, but we did know that they were friendly to us. So we ended up, the 2 enlisted men in a grape vineyard. And one of them the men came up and told us to follow him in kind of sign language. So we followed him into a little village, and they put us up for the night. We didn't know that the other 2 or 3 buildings that were in that village were occupied by the people that were looking for us, the Bulgarian soldiers. So the next morning they told us to get down in a ravine and hide, and a partisan would come by and whistle twice, and we would get up and follow him. That worked out just fine, but just as we got about halfway out of sight over the hill, here a couple of boom booms went off, and we thought they were shooting at us at first, but the partisan with us knew they wasn't. And we looked back, and there was some of those Bulgarian soldiers trying to sneak up on us from behind. But we went on down and joined up with the co-pilot and bombardier, and the partisans escorted us to meet their group. There was about 70, 75 people in their group that wandered around all over that part of the country. We followed them, and we learned real quick that they were guarding us from injury or any combat contact, really. Because when we get ambushed, they get between us and they ambush us. And we were being ambushed 3 or 4 times a week there right at the beginning by, we didn't know who. There's about 4 or 5 different parties in that part of the country, and every time 2 of them met, they had a gun battle. This went on for a little while, and then the thing kind of settled down, and they.
Now, did you take up arms and fight with them? Or, I mean,
We could, if we had arms, we could fight with them if we insisted, but they wanted, first of all, to protect us from any injury.
okay.
This went on for months, really. And around Thanksgiving, we slipped down a canyon wall and captured a power plant that the Germans had put in there. They packed water from way up the mountain down there in about a 14-inch pipe, and the pressure from that run this little generator that furnished light for the little town that's really in that part of the country called the city.
So eventually, after almost a year, and then Uncle Sam came in and began taking you guys out, and you finally made it back home after roughly a year on the lam. That's amazing.
Yes, it went on from one thing to another. Well, we had one experience where it was a real scare as far as the ambush was concerned, because it was at night, and it was with Bulgarian soldiers on the actual line between Bulgaria and Yugoslavia.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. We really appreciate you sharing it with us. And Dale is a POW. He's an evadee. And there is an organization of American evadés like Dale. They were on the loose. I wish Art Leadingham could be here tonight. He was with the 376. He got interned after Ploesti, went back to his unit, promptly got shot down, spent 65 days on the run, had a French nurse as his guide. She took care of him and got him to the border and eventually got him out. But 65 days she stayed with him. They traveled across Europe, and finally he got out. He never knew her name. And that's one of the goals of the Evadee Association, is to hook these people back up. Have you ever met any of your benefactors that took care of you, Dale? Have you ever met any of them?
I've not met them, but I'm a member of the Escape Evasion Society, and I get publications from them all the time.
Sure.
And those people that helped us in Europe, come over here for their annual meetings, almost every year.
Great, super. Well, hey, I'd like you to pass the mic to Jim McLean.
That lighting light over there, that's to be.
Oh.
Okay.
Can you bring the light, your light, the camera light?
Oh.
Is that okay? There you go. You okay? Is that better, Jim? There you go. It's okay. Sorry, Jim, we didn't know.
Sorry, Jim, I didn't realize. Jim is one of the prime instigators of why we're here tonight. About Thanksgiving time, and I won't go into the whole story, I got an email from him, "How you doing on the reunion?" I said, "What reunion are you talking about?" "Oh, we're doing the 70th and dating." I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah, and I'll take care of it and I'll help you out." And how could I say no? Jim? Jim was with the original cadre of the 389th. He trained with them, went overseas with them, were part of the Bob Wright group. They went down to Africa in late June, flew their first bombing missions from North Africa up to Sicily, Italy. Jim was on a mission July 10th? The July 10th mission?
July 9th.
July 9th. They were one of the first.
I'm sorry, but you shot down.
When you got shot down over Sicily. Could you tell us a little bit?
July 12th.
Could you tell us just a little? He used up 8 of his 9 lives before Ploesti. That's what I'm trying to say. In the space of 30 days, from the 1st of July, and for a lot of you guys, the 1st of July to roughly the middle of October, 43, about 4 or 5 months, they used up every, what they went through, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is really amazing. But could you talk about that mission, Jim, just a little bit about what happened that day?
You mean the day we crashed?
In Sicily, yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, that's almost another story in itself. This was our second mission, this was our third mission, second in 2 days, to the same target vicinity, Reggio di Calabria in Italy. The day before we had bombed the airfield. On the 12th, we were going back to bomb the ferry slips and to inhibit the transport of material and so forth into Sicily, because as the presenter of the mission said, as he walked, he was walking off the stage and he turned around and he says, "Oh, by the way," he says, "the invasion of Sicily began the day before yesterday." So the purpose of the mission was to intervene with movement of German materials into Sicily. Well, in any event, the day before the bombing had been excellent on the airfield. This day we were going back to the same altitude and more or less in the same direction, and that may have been the cause of our unfortunate result. We were caught in heavy flak. To abbreviate it, we ended up with only one engine fully operative. And from there we, of course, the safest haven was Malta. So we were heading to Malta, but as we proceeded along, fortunately there was no fighter interception. And as we proceeded southward, I made some calculations that indicated that we would be in the water 50 miles short of Malta. Well, Bob Wright, knowing the danger of attempting to ditch a B-24 had told us even before we were sent off to Africa. He had gathered the crew together and in confidence told them that based on his research, which I can assure you was very thorough, he determined that you could not ditch a B-24 successfully without fatalities. So he advised the crew, if we're ever headed back from Europe and we get up to the North Sea, and I determine that we're not going to be able to get back to England, I'm going to turn around and everybody's going to bail out to live to fight another day. Now that was done in total confidence because it was against the protocol of the time. So he obviously wasn't going, the reason I was giving him this advice that we would be 50 miles short of Malta is that I knew he wouldn't do the ditching effort. Well, we were cruising down the eastern coast of Sicily, looking for places to land, and I said to Bob, is it possible to land on a beach? He says, yeah, sure, Jim, or Mac. Everybody called me Mac. And as we swept around that southeast corner of Sicily, that pointed corner down there, here was the beach, visible for miles, but no place to land, because there were landing craft of every sort and vehicles and stashes of material. There was no place to set down. So and all the time we're losing altitude. So we began heading inland, looking for a place to land, and just about the same moment, as I was pushing my throat mic to say I'd spotted a field, Wright announced, I see a field, Mac. And it turned out to be the same field. Only the field was a plowed field on a steep hillside with the furrows running crosswise to our landing direction. Well, Bob Wright did what I consider the most, skillful, controlled crash landing that I've ever heard or experienced or know about. He brought that B-24 down, wheels down, we bounced down that hillside. At the bottom of the hill was a road with ditches on either side, and as we rolled across that, it tore off the nose wheel. So the 24 ended up with the nose in a vineyard and angled up about 30 degrees. In the meantime, been throwing out every conceivable thing that would lighten the load. So as we were gathered around by under the wing, considering our situation, what do we do now? We hear gunfire and bullets whistling by our heads. Well, in the meantime, there was a line of peasants slowly walking down the hill that we had just bounced down. And the first Wright figured, and I likewise, and anyway, I suppose all of us, that they were the ones that were shooting at us. So he says, Richie, the tail gunner, get back in that turret and let those bastards have it. I can't, sir. Why not? Because I threw out all the ammunition, sir. Of course, that's what you're supposed to do. But in the heat of battle, sometimes you lose that sense. But anyhow, then we realized it was coming from elsewhere, and as we turned around and looked across this vineyard, we could see heads popping up in a flash and the thing of a bullet. Well, to make a long story short, so we think it's the Germans, of course. So this is when I found out that the navigator was the second in command on a B-24. Wright says, Fred, I'm sorry, it, you take 4 men and get in the ditch and go one way, and he tells the bombardier, you take 4 men, Mac and McSween, and go the other way. Mac and I will surrender. We'll try to stall them as long as we can. You get the hell out of here, and while we try to keep them at bay. And we both start walking towards them. We throw our 45s away. A very obvious thing to let them know we went on. Kept walking towards it and hollering, "We're Americans, we'll surrender." And they responded, and I said, "Bob, that sound like Italians or German to you?" So I couldn't tell. So then we yelled again about "we'll surrender," and they hollered back. Eventually, or very quickly, it turned out they were Canadians from Alberta, Canada. The 14th Infantry Regiment, who thought this was a German aircraft that had seen a crash. They had been on a nearby road with 2 weapons carriers carrying ammunition up to the lines and seen the crash. But as they progressed through that vineyard, they were coming directly, more or less directly at the B-24 and couldn't see the markings. Probably in addition to that, they wouldn't recognize the B-24 as necessarily an Allied aircraft. But in any event...
And Jim, after all that you went through, and you finally got back to your base in Africa, I think you went through several days of going to Malta, and all of this stuff happened. If I recall, when you got in your tent back in Africa, what was the question they asked you when you walked in? It's like, where the hell have you been?
Well,
that's what you got. Nobody missed you, but where the hell have you been?
I'll forget the details and just give you the fundamentals here. The Canadians were very good to us. We rode up to the front line with help them offload the ammunition. They took us back to their beach bivouac and shared their food with us and gave us a blanket to lay on the ground. And so they were very, very generous in their help. Incidentally, on the way back to the bivouac on the beach, they were liberating generous quantities of red wine, of which a lot was consumed that night. The next morning, I woke up with the worst hangover I've ever had before or since. But directors, everybody go in different directions and find out whatever you can to help us decide how the hell we get back to Benghazi. Well, I walked down a dusty road. Curiously, the Sicilians didn't pay much attention to me. Hardly anybody even turned ahead. And anyhow, I found after walking 5 miles or so, I happened to stumble on a British RAF Field 5 Spitfires. It was a pasture, actually, but they had a radio tent, so I asked them if they could radio 9th Air Force headquarters in Cairo and tell them of our predicament, which they did. So then I had walked back to the bivouac on the beach. In the meantime, Bob had been down to the beach that day, and he found one of the British landing craft was going to be returning to Malta on Thursday night. So at least we had our transportation to Malta. Now the next day, Thursday, Rob and I went back to this, walked back to this Spitfire base. No response. We went back the next day and there was a response from 9th Air Force. In total, leave aircraft, proceed to Malta. Thanks a lot. series of just pure chance encounters, we learned that there was an American Air Corps office in the cliffs of Malta. They had dug out cliffs for both for air raid protection, and they had corridors and just lights hung from the ceiling, and then little caves or rooms off of it, and all because of the Malta at that time was known as the most bombed spot on Earth. It was shortly before that. But anyhow, we found this Air Corps colonel, and he said, "Hey, we got a B-24 out at the airport. It's been repaired. You wise guys want to fly it back to Benghazi? Sure. Now we got our transportation." But somewhere in all of this, I might tell you, the escape kits included Italian currency. As we got off that British landing craft in Malta that morning, we were walking down the quay, and we saw a barber shop, a narrow front with a long barber shop. There must have been 10 barbers in there. And all of us were direly in need of shaving and haircut, shall we say. And so come to find out that Italian currency was good in Malta. So we all got shaves and haircuts. But anyhow, so we found the Daisy May was the B-24 that was at their airport. It was the 98th Air Force, or 98th bomber, 98th Bomb Group airplane. So we returned it to their base, and they in turn trucked us back to Burka 4. And so all of that was done just one happenstance after another, from running into an American infantry captain to some British officers who invited us to their place for lunch that day. And so there I am back in Africa. 2 days later, they began practicing for Ploesti.
And the reason I wanted Jim to talk about this is all of you got the Friends Journal?
Yes.
And Jim talks about his Ploesti experiences in the journal. So in the space of 30 days, what this guy went through. Jim, thanks
Yes,
a lot.
the current issue of Friends, I'm the author of the cover article at this gentleman's request, and I'll be glad to sign any. I've heard that increases the value.
There you go. I want to read a little bit about Bill's mission on the 1st of August. He was in an airplane called Little Abner. Little Abner was shot down. Warden Weaver was the pilot. The airplane was leading the third flight following Colonel Johnson into the smoke and flames over the target area. They came out of that crematory with 3 engines damaged and their controls shot away. 40 miles away from the target, Weaver could no longer hold his ship in the air. He belly landed near Wisnia Dombrovista, and a wingtip caught the ground during the skid. Little Abner came to a halt with the nose rolled under the fuselage, the Bombay telescope into the flight deck, and the engineer, William J. Shetler, crushed it to death inside the fallen top turret. The wreck burst into flames in the Bombay section. While 6 men managed to get out through the rear section, the pilot and the navigator were imprisoned on the flight deck. Lieutenant Weaver seized a crack in the windshield, forced open a hole, and wiggled out. But his navigator, Walt Sorensen, followed. His chute harness followed in the opening, and he was stuck halfway out, with co-pilot Robert Snyder still trapped behind him. The flames spread forward. One of the men who escaped from the rear, Bombardier William L. Reese Jr., went through the fire and exploded ammunition and cut away Sorensen's harness. Reese and radio man Jesse L. Hindley hauled both trapped men clear. Bill, do you remember what happened when you guys went down?
Yes, too well. I'm going to change the subject just a little bit. Joanne and I have been visiting a lot of reunions around 105 prisoners of war and so forth through the years. But one of the most amazing things I think are the stories that these fellows tell. It's better than anything you've ever done or will do. But I think we're missing the most fantastic thing that I've noticed throughout. That do you ever look around and see what the guys have accomplished in the last 40, 50 years? I'm so proud of my family, and I know these guys are too. And the jobs they've done, they went back to school. That to me is the most fantastic thing I think I've seen around here. And my hat's off to all of them.
Well, seated next to Bill is Colonel William Morton. And Colonel Morton lives here in the Dayton area. And he started out as an enlisted man in the 44th Bomb Group, flew the Ploesti mission. I believe you were an engineer, Colonel Morton. Bill, you want to give it next? Yeah, to that gentleman there. He flew Ploesti, got his commission, and went on to fly jets in Korea and Vietnam. So he, again, we'll mention Wiener Neustadt. He got the Distinguished Flying Cross for what he did there. But Colonel, could you just share a few thoughts of your career in the military and your remembrance of the Ploesti mission?
Ploesti mission?
Yeah, just speak into the mic. You can stay seated.
Yeah,
Colonel.
okay. What do you want to know about the Ploesti mission?
Well, obviously, the experiences of the 44th Bomb Group going through White 5, and you guys came out relatively unscathed on that mission, I believe.
Yeah. Well, as we went in so low that the people on the ground were throwing pitchforks at us.
That's pretty low.
That's the one thing. I think the thing I'd like to tell you though is, all of you know that Pearl Harbor in Hawaii was bombed by the Japs, and they sunk all the ships that we had there. But what you probably don't know, I don't remember seeing it in a paper in place back in those days, but the entire Pacific Ocean, everything in it, was commanded by one, he was a Navy man, general type officer, and I was working for him at the time. And when the Pearl Harbor was bombed out, his brother was a commander of a battleship, and he came up, didn't park anything, he drove by and come in and picked up his brother who was in command of the whole thing. And his brother grabbed me because I was his cryptographer. And we started to Japan. We went to Japan. And here all their ships were lined up. Boom, 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 boom. We drove right up behind them and put a torpedo in every damn one of them. And they sunk everything they had. And I don't think that was ever reported in the newspaper. That's all I got.
Bob Rance. And Bob is a member of a fraternity of flyers that he was in the 7th wave of the 98th Bomb Group on the Ploesti mission. There were 7 waves, if I'm correct, Bob.
Right.
There were 7 waves, 6 planes in that final wave.
Big part.
There were 6 planes in that 7th
Yes.
wave. Every one of them were shot down. And Bob was a survivor of his B-24. And Bob, I don't want to relive old memories, but if you could just maybe share a little bit about what you remember from that day.
Well, actually, what happened was all 6 planes were shot down, but and there were only 6 of us that actually got out of the planes. Captain Taylor, in his plane, was the only man that came out. He was the pilot. Actually, he rang the bailout alarm, got out of his position, walked through, made sure everybody on the flight deck was out, walked through, saw that everybody was out of the plane, and he jumped out of the bomb bay. Yet, when he got down on the ground, he was the only man alive out of his plane. Now, what happened to the other men, nobody ever knew. He was one. The 3 of us got out of our plane. We were 3, so that made 4. The plane next to us, Jack Ross, got out of it. There were 2 that got out of that plane. All the other planes, all the men went down with the plane. Now that, when you stop and think about it, we were tail end Charlies, and every plane went down. It was unbelievable. And I feel that being out of the 60 men that were in the planes, 6 of us got out. It's unbelievable. How lucky can you get?
Well, I've done enough talking up here. Does anybody have any, excuse me? Hey, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. Dick, you got anything you want to tell us, remembrances of flying the Ploesti mission? Or maybe on the Wiener Neustadt mission?
Boy, I don't know. You're giving the old guy a chance to start talking, and God knows when he'll shut up. I'd like to ask first, are there any members of the working press present?
Tomorrow.
Any non-working press present? Any regular newsmen? Any irregular newsmen? How about the representative of the local high school newspaper? God, this is pretty sad. Well, anyway, we'll move on from that. Now, I was going to say something about Ploesti. What was it I was going to say something about? Well, let's see. One of the thing that occasionally jars me, because we still have some guys here who are captains and majors, and some guys who are tech sergeants and sergeants like me. And one thing that stuck in my mind is when we were in Benghazi, we flew down, as everybody knows, without a full complement of ground personnel. And so the job, which was usually taken over by intelligence officers, was handled by our own flying officers, our navigators, captains, and bombardier, and so forth. And these men were charged with censoring the papers, the letters that the enlisted men had written home. Now, some of these enlisted men were damn well educated and didn't have the eyesight to make cadet. And one of them was a 5-year capper from Harvard, Martin Goldman, that I happen to know personally out in the 506 Squadron. There were guys of this caliber, but there were also fellows who barely made it out of the 5th grade. They quit school during the Depression. The family didn't have the money. They tried to go to work. And their writing was illiterate. To some it was humorous. To others it was very touching to hear someone express in his overstated cumbersome way his true love and his affection for his wife. And it was a very laughable thing to some of these officers, and they would read passages of this stuff and pass them around the tent during this Henselshire proceeding. It was a loathsome process. I never got over feeling pretty bad about it. Not for the men, but for the system that it represented. It was piss poor. Well, I'm going from that into a happier sentiment. One of the things I remember about our plane when we were shot down, it was not at Ploesti, it was at Wiener Neustadt. And in the back of the plane, we had, when the plane went down, it was on flames and in a spin. And the guys in back, because of centrifugal force, found it difficult to get out. And Nick Popovich, one of the waist gunners, was able to free himself and was ready to jump out. And he looked at his other waist gunner, Larry Kalal, who was my assistant radio operator from Illinois. Larry had a flak suit, as they all did in the back of the plane, and it was twisted on the shoulders to hold the two pieces of flak, front and back, together with safety wires, such as they used to tighten the engine nuts and hold the engine intact. And Larry somehow, in the frantic moment of trying to get on so he could snap on his British parachute, get out of his flak suit, twisted the safety wire the wrong way. And Nick Popovich, who had looked at him, couldn't stick around. And when he bailed out, Larry was still there, trying to get it turned the right way so he could get his flak suit off and snap his parachute on. And he never made it. The plane continued downward in a spin and crashed in a ball of fire. And Larry was on board, as were three other members of the crew. The tail gunner didn't get out. Ball turret gunner didn't get out. Anyway, that was a Ploesti. That was not a Ploesti. That was just the old Wiener Neustadt. On Ploesti, one of the things I remember is neither my pilot nor my co-pilot made the flight. It was an all-volunteer mission, you may recall, and some people took that pretty seriously, I guess. Anyway, I was flown by Major Bean, our 506 Squadron CO, and Lieutenant Michaels, the guy who just transferred in from the Canadian Air Force in America, but he'd been trained in Canada. And these two guys flew me through Ploesti. And I can recall on the bomb run where we had at about 3 minutes where we held on a straight course along the railroad track where the 88mm flak guns were blasting away at us. And we were told, of course, not of course, but it was a matter of fact that when you shoot your 50 calibers, they were dual mounted 50 calibers, allow short bursts of 20 or 30 shots at a time, otherwise the barrel heats up and destroys the rifle and impairs the accuracy. But on this bomb run, on that 3 minutes on the railroad track into the burning target, because it was burning, because as we know, somebody kind of screwed up and dropped the bombs before we got there. Major Beam said, hell, they were giving this 20, 40 shots out of their waist guns. You let her go! And they fastened down the trigger bars, and we had about 10, 50 calibers all shooting at once, just burning the barrels out on the bomb run in, and that plane was actually shaking because of the impact of these 50 calibers all going off at once, not to mention the shaking from the 88 millimeters and the other ACAC that was directed at us. Anyway, that's enough for me. I'll pass it on to somebody else.
Sure. Does anybody have any questions from the crowd?
Sure, there we go. Bill?
Got one real quick one. We got three of the
guest of the princess, and I've been doing some research, and I'm seeing all kinds of numbers of how many of you guys ended up up in the mountains in the resort area. I would like to ask each of you, in turn, makes no difference where you start, how many of you were there?
How many what?
How many of you ended up as guests of the princess?
How many of you were POWs?
Yeah, from the low level rate.
We're doing about 100 of us in the prison camp.
About 100 POWs.
We all knew her.
Okay, Bob?
We all knew her. She was,
Here you go. Here you go. I still don't understand the question. The question was, is that in terms of how many POWs actually ended up as a guest of as the princess, so to speak, there was about 100, right? About 100 POWs?
110.
Yeah.
110 men that were taken prisoner, and everyone knew the princess. When she came over, she came into Chicago, she called me and told me she was in town. I took her out to dinner. I couldn't take her home. I didn't know her. I didn't know. I couldn't take her home. But I took her out to dinner. Every one of us knew her.
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question, but I knew Princess Katajan very well. And the last experience I had with her, after several times she came to stay with us, she says that she wrote me a letter, and we were down in St. George at the time, Utah, southern Utah, and she says, I'm going to be there for 6 weeks in your area, and I want you to show me around Grand Canyon, Las Vegas, Reno. I answered that I'm sorry, but we were taking a long trip during that period. She was a remarkable lady, though. She was a linguist. She was very wealthy in her day, very wealthy. And she was dedicated to her cause, which was telling the American people what the danger of the Russian communist system was. That was her message. It became very stale after a while, after about 20 years, because the Cold War sort of died off and we weren't afraid of the Russians anymore. But she went on with the same message, and she kind of wore us out, to be honest with you.
She was one of the arranged the trucks to take us from the prison camp to Bucharest. It took us a week to get through the German lines. When we finally got through the German lines, they sent planes from Italy to Bucharest to take us back. But she was instrumental in quite a few things in keeping the American prisoners in Romania. But she was, he said she was a rich lady, but she wasn't. She was very frugal. Very
to the States.
What?
She was poor when she came to the States.
Yeah, she was on Social Security.
Well,
She was on Social Security. She was rich in her country, but when she came over here, she had to work for a living. She went around speaking at all these speaking engagements all over in order to make a few bucks.
I wanted,
Al, I've got to qualify that. In Romania, she was very wealthy.
Yeah.
She owned a lot of jewelry, she had a title, and she owned many, many acres of land. When she came to Paris, she had nothing. And when she came to the United States, she had nothing. So, you're right, Al, but you just started in the wrong place.
Also, she, while we were there, she also brought a lot of musical instruments. I remember playing an accordion that she had brought. and we, our Christmas, remember the Christmas show that we put on? All the instruments that we had, and that was all because she brought them.
How about other questions from the crowd?
I got a question.
Okay. Here, just a sec, we're gonna let Dick Ted, he kind of spoke to the front, and then we'll get to you, Tony.
I'll not conceal my true purpose in being here is not to communicate information, but to peddle my book. And my nephew is sitting there with a number of unsold books, and they're more in the hotel room. And let me remind you that if you went on the internet, the commercial seller Amazon.com, and looked for this book, it would cost you about $25. That's $20 plus $3.95 shipping and handling, and they charge you sales tax. You can buy it from me for a flat $10.
Tony, I'm gonna come around to you. We have an actual question from the panel.
One of you mentioned the flight crews, that you sound the bailout bell. What altitude was you when you hit the bailout bell? One of you mentioned that. What?
What else, any of you guys that bailed out, that hit the silk?
No, when I mentioned Taylor, I mentioned Taylor.
Here you go.
When I mentioned Taylor, he was past the target, and he was flying home.
Oh, yeah.
See, but what happened to his men, nobody knew. And he was the only one alive out of his plane.
Bob, how high are you when you bailed out?
How high were you?
How high were you when you bailed out?
Well, when I was shot down, we were on our bomb run, and we were to raise to 300 feet, and we were on our in the process of raising from treetop level to 300 feet, and Jack Ross was the plane next to us, and he said he saw us as we were approaching the 300-foot altitude. He saw us jump out, and the plane kept going straight up rather than leveling off. So we must have been about, I would say, probably anywhere from 300 to maybe 500-600 feet up.
Good. Thank you. Okay, Dick.
Well, my recollection of the day of being in Neustadt is we were flying 19,000 feet, and flak and fighters got us, and we were in the spin. And the hobby, the co-pilot gives me this, and I was the first guy out. We just delivered the bombs. You know, a plane lifts like that when you get rid of the bomb load. And I just rolled right off the runway there, the strut, the frame line, rolled off, had my parachute ready to go, 18,000 feet up. And we were told it was probably a good idea to defer opening your chute and not leave yourself a target to be found readily by search crews. So keep going down to the 3,000 or 4,000 feet. But the plane was in a spin, and I was afraid that it might blow up and throw shrapnel at my parachute. So I pulled the ripcord and opened up when I was about 17,000 feet. And as I sat there drifting down, it was a nice day, some fluffy, few blue clouds in the blue sky, a few white clouds in the blue sky. And I'm just drifting down like this, and I think to myself, this is a really selfish thing to say, because I just saw 4 of my buddies die. this is the happiest day in my life. God damn it, I'm going to live through this fucking war. So I could be a POW, I could do a year standing on my head. I didn't think the war would be more than here. And I pitched down through that, and it come down and landed right near a thicket, and I rolled up my parachute and hid in the thicket, hiding down, and some German soldiers come around. I could hear them yelling at each other in German, and I thought, by God, those guys, if they're wondering if there's somebody hiding in here, they'll just put a few shots in there, see if anybody yells. So I came out fast. Here I am. So I walked into 17B, and sort of indirectly, after being processed. Being processed was we went through Dulag Loop, where you process you to, before they send you to prison camp, and I was interrogated by this German officer, really Erich von Stroheim type. And he had kind of a riding crop, and he had a leather thing in his hand, and the German boots, leather boots and breeches, and I'm sitting in there. They make you wait. I was waiting to be interrogated. I've been in solitary for 3 days. And he came in and I said, hey, what's going on here? I'm not supposed to be in solitary. I'm a prisoner of war. And he says in his guttural German, who says you were a prisoner of war? You were found hiding outside a German city. You don't have a proper uniform on. It's true, I had a lucky scarf and some other crazy clothes that I wore just because I thought from him luck. So I knew he was full of crap. And so was I about to call his bluff? No. I said, yes, sir. Yes, sir. And he said, and to prove that you're not a spy, you have to tell me when you came from England, how long you've been overseas, what's the name of your outfit, what was your last target, and on and on and on. And of course, I've been drilled through the name, rank, and serial number process, and it was no great difficulty to stay with that. But it was an interesting process because you're never sure. I was when I was in my solitary time, I was in a cell. They sent us out to go to the bathroom, and we had a little kind of dwarf jury guard, an old Bergstrom retread, who would escort us. And next to me in the cell was about a 6'4" British officer who had this haughty imperialistic style, which was admirable because when he went outside his room, he put his boots out on the doorway and said, "He's sorry, old man, would you mind giving him a good polish?" Anyway, that's the kind of stuff that makes fun.
Good.
Anybody else take another question?
I got a question. It's 70 years ago, July 31st. You guys are all briefed, all the flyers that flew tidal waves. You were briefed on the mission. You went to bed that night with your crews, obviously talked about it. Just share, if anybody can just jump ball here, anybody would like to make a comment. What was going on through your head about the next day? What was going to lie ahead for you and your crew? Anybody have any comment on that? Okay. The night before, did you sleep good? Anybody?
This is going to be my first mission.
See.
This is going to be my first mission, so I didn't have anything to get excited about because I didn't really realize what was going on.
Anyone else? Let's show our appreciation to these men.